Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be back doing another webinar and this wintry evening in the northern beaches of Australia. Tonight, it's a subject that's really close to my heart, but I'm probably guilty for saying that every time. I'm just a sucker for being passionate about recovery, but tonight is looking at recovery in the real world and looking at some of the themes and challenges of recovery, whether it be in early recovery, which is what I'll probably focus on this evening, or for people in long-term recovery that might come up against other challenges. So, of course, tonight we're looking through the lens of South Pacific Private and the developmental model of immaturity. So, I'll start to take you through some of the themes of what I want to talk about this evening. There's a poem that you'll see around recovery, and it sums up a lot of the time the insanity that we see in the recovery process, especially around addictions and mental health issues and uh, the relational problems that we'll have when you've got developmental trauma. As I walk down the street, there is a hole. I don't see it. I fall in. It isn't my fault. It takes a long time to get out. I walk down the same street, there is still a hole. I pretend not to see it, I fall in. I pretend it's not my fault, it takes a long time to get out. I walk down the same street, there is the same hole. I see it, I fall in anyway. It's a habit. I get out quicker this time. I walk down the same street, there is a deep hole. I see it and I walk around it and I don't fall in. And I walk down a different street. The the last bit of that poem sort of sums up the obvious that eventually you'll hear those sayings out in the recovery world, throw in the towel and win, to try and encapsulate that if once I could just surrender and really identify what was happening for me and make different choices, life became radically different. But it's very interesting in those different chapters where when you're in the unconsciousness of your addiction, where you're just acting it out and really not sure how to get out of it, and at times even in early recovery, not really even knowing that it is a problem. I certainly remember being 17, 18 years old and having a T-shirt that said "drinking problem?" ? I drink, I fall down, no problem. And I wore that really proudly, like it was not an issue. And I really couldn't understand people that didn't drink to get drunk and have those sort of war stories on a Monday of the blackouts and etc. So the idea of what we're going to look at tonight is breaking free of that. I do like the definition in recovery that insanity is repeating the same mistakes and expecting a different result. And even through the different chapters in that poem, it sums up the stages of change you'll see as a recovery tool where we can even walk down the street, we pretend not to see it, we sort of know there's a problem, but I'm still going to try and manage this. We end up falling in. I'm going to walk down the street, I see it, and I just fall in. And that can be when you've got to that time in your addiction where you think, well, this is who I am and I can't change it. And I love that Carl Jung saying, and people that know me, I say it a lot, that if we do not make the unconscious conscious, it directs our life, and we call it fate. And I think it sums up that third chapter. It's interesting though in recovery, and I suppose I'm going to talk a bit about this tonight, probably more than the others, is the last two chapters of this poem. And I walk down the same street, there is a deep hole, I see it and I walk around it. In recovery, we can certainly get abstinent from a particular problem. We can start to maybe deal with the secondary symptom of a depression or an anxiety, but we don't either deal with the underlying issues and the relational problems and the complexity of the secondary symptoms, which I want to go into this evening. So we're still on the same street, and we can even build a false confidence in recovery where we walk around that hole and think we'll be fine this time. And I do hear people in recovery thinking, I want to test myself. I want to go back to that old mate who still smokes dope and sit there and not smoke. And I think I want to talk about the dangers of that this evening as we go forward. So like all the recovery programs here, Pia Melody, she's the originator of the developmental immaturity model. She says the first thing we've got to do is turn up. It's a decision. And once we turn up, It's a decision to grow. I've got to take that decision myself. It can't be made by anyone else. And the way to do that is to face our reality. It's time to really look at what that is. Now, in this program, we talk about the two recoveries. This is very important if you want to get the happiness that they talk about in Alcoholics Anonymous and the holistic recovery that we know now is really necessary. Firstly, I need to recover from my history, and I need to recover from my disease. Now, the secondary symptoms is what PMLD would claim as the disease, the depression, the anxiety, the addiction issues. But the recovery from our history is where we need to look back at the developmental trauma and take some responsibility now for the fact that we're left with certain things that we're powerless over in regards to our esteem, our boundaries, our sense of reality, the way we look after our needs and wants, and our moderation issues. Now, some people can stumble into a 12-step meeting, and they can get a sponsor, and they can start to work the steps, and they can even go to AA and Codependence Anonymous, and they might not need therapy. But there's others who definitely need therapy. So how would you know that? How would you know whether you should be seeking out some extra help or not? Well, a couple of the criteria that I've always found helpful is when you in your recovery and now clean and sober from whatever addiction it is, or managing the symptoms of your depression, anxiety, then if you feel too much pain or shame when you're looking back at your history, or when it sort of drifts on into your everyday life, when you are aware of it and it's causing too much pain and shame, that's when you're probably going to need to reach out and get support. That you become aware of the defenses, that you can start to see when you look back about repression and suppression, you start to identify now that you're in recovery that was times that were really destructive, where even your life might have felt like it was being threatened, and you can see that disassociation, and even have periods in your adult life where when you look back, you've just lost whole chunks of your childhood. The other side of that in our adult life is when we can see those in our childhood history, and the memory loss certainly being part of our adult life, that we can find ourselves minimizing things that we knew happened, or that we're in denial, that we literally know something happened but we don't talk about it, or we're quite deluded. And sometimes you get some really strange feedback from friends and family when you talk about the event in a way that's really detached and gives it a completely different meaning. And then you see sort of jaws dropping around you as people go, "Oh my God, I can't believe you experienced that," and sort of see it the way that you do. So if you relate to any of those, then you'd fall into that category that probably needs that extra support of the 12-step fellowships and the support groups that are out there, and the support to go deeper into the pain and the shame that we talk about. So this model is at the core of everything that we do here at SPP, and it's certainly at the core of my personal recovery, and it's the core of the recovery programs that we teach. This program tonight is looking at recovery in the real world, and so the two recoveries that I was hitting at there is that a model. If I read, and you might want to follow along, and you can see this slide is that children need healthy parenting. This is the bottom run sort of tells us what happens here. Children need healthy parenting to develop and maintain attitudes and beliefs around their value and their vulnerability, their sense of self, their needs and wants, and their ability to live in the moment age appropriately, spontaneously and openly. But if they experience childhood lack of nurturing, trauma and abuse and neglect, it will interrupt the process of development. And so instead of maturing, we will learn survival techniques. And you might have heard that saying that we learn to survive and not thrive. In regards to our self-esteem, boundaries, reality, and dependency and moderation issues, you will start to see evidence of living in the extremes. And I've got some examples of that as we go through tonight's presentation. But in regards to our esteem, it's the less than, acting better than, vulnerability, too vulnerable, acting invulnerable, bad and flawed, acting good and perfect, too dependent, acting anti-dependent, feeling out of control, acting in control. Now that's when PMLD talks about I need to get in recovery from my history and become aware of the impact of that developmental trauma. This is the section that we're talking about. That then leads on to, if that's untreated and we're living in those extremes, it'll lead to secondary symptoms and it will result in ongoing current crises, unmanageability and intimacy issues with others. Now, in regards to that, I want to look a little bit more deeply. So in regards to those negative esteem issues, when we've had that less than acting better than, what we'll notice as the secondary symptom around our esteem is that we'll have negative control issues. Now, what that means is in our relationships, we will either, as a result of that less than better than, try and control others, or find ourselves allowing others to control us as a response to that less than better than experience. Boundaries, you'll notice resentment issues. If I don't have the ability to filter out the reality of others and contain my reality and feel it and sense it clearly, then I'll find myself with damaged boundaries physically and internally and sexually, taking on the reality of others. I'm going to be in that victim anger that goes to that. I can't keep it out. I'll be in blame. And then I'll give myself permission to act in that offender role of other people's realities. So the damaged boundaries leads to this resentment issues that people experience as rage, either internal rage as they turn that victim anger on themselves, or an external rage where they start to rage out, either overtly with that rage that can be loud and physically abusive, or passively aggressively, invertedly acting in rage. That's silent violence that we talk about. The reality issues is in regards to living in the two extremes of feeling bad and flawed and trying to be good and perfect, is that we will simply at times make others our higher power or try to be their higher power. Regarding dependency issues, it's a little bit more complicated. We'll start to see it in three main areas. That the secondary symptoms of our dependency, if we didn't get our needs and wants met in any areas or quite holistically, then we will have a needless and wantlessness covering up a too needy. So how we'll notice that is we'll start to see signs of physical illness. And that's where we get sick as a result of the deadness created by either the relational PTSD or those core issues in their extremes. We'll start to see mental health issues, depression and anxiety, personality issues develop as a result of immaturity in meeting our needs and in living in the extremes. And then we'll start to see those addiction issues. Any form of addiction will do to regulate and moderate our state obsessionally and compulsively. So these secondary symptoms then sort of accumulate in moderation issues. And regarding moderation as a secondary symptom, you'll see it as an intimacy issue. We're going to have trouble relating to others appropriately due to the effects of that PTSD, the core issues and the addictions. I've been thoroughly impressed and inspired by the work of Stephen Porges, the doctor that created the polyvagal theory. In Bessel van der Kolk's Ford in the beginning of the polyvagal theory book, he sums up when you've got developmental trauma, just how difficult it is to be in intimacy and relating to other people, that we're easy to anger. I think one of the sayings that I've nearly memorized from that book is the milk of human kindness sometimes is simply not enough. If you've got developmental trauma, you just get stuck in this resentment and the impact of others, and we don't know how to process it. Now, these secondary symptom experiences are all part of the difficulty of living in the now, and it's why just being abstinent doesn't work. Back when I got into my own recovery program 29 years ago, this information didn't really exist in Australia especially. And I was talking this week via email with Lorraine, who's in Europe at the moment, Lorraine Wood, the owner of our facility, and just talking about the origins of Codependence Anonymous in Australia and when that was brought back here by Bill and Lorraine, and when those first and early meetings started and the conventions that started. And those meetings were full of people that were clean or sober in another program or had depression and anxiety and were managing it through a mental health program. And these underlying issues untreated were just causing them so much distress. So just being abstinent without dealing with these untreated primary symptoms will still leave you creating crisis and unmanageability and relational issues. Now, that alone is not where it stops. When it comes to relationships, then in regards to self-esteem, on top of that secondary symptom, I'm going to have these relational esteem issues. So if I'm in relationship with you, I'll find it very difficult not to go one up or one down, either low self-esteem less than or low self-esteem better than, in regards to connection and relationship with you, in regards to boundaries where there was that resentment and raging. Relationships with others will have the themes of enmeshment, either feeling too close and too lost in uh, someone else's reality, or trying to desperately enforce your reality on theirs, or needing to step back and totally avoid and be quite anorectic about connections and relation and being in relationship. Where there was the spirituality issues in regards to our reality, meaning that that lostness, not knowing who we are, needing to make others more powerful than us, or we needed to be more powerful, we'll start to see the relational issue of dishonesty coming up. In dependency, where we saw that physical illness, mental health issues, and addictions, when all those things or some of those things are active, we will simply have problems with interdependence. We will not be appropriately meeting our needs and wants. And so we'll be using things from outside of ourselves to make ourselves feel better. In regards to moderation, you'll see where there was those intimacy issues, that you'll start to see the themes of intensity. I think intensity really sums up this model. Now, one of the slides that shows our model in a nutshell simply talks at what I've just described, takes us from left to right through that functional childhood, what we really need to grow those core issues. Now, childhood trauma causes immaturity in that, and that's where you see that dysfunction in regards to our wounded child and adult adapted child. That trauma and immaturity drives the unmanageability in regards to all of those secondary symptoms, and that trauma, immaturity, and unmanageability creates relational problems. Now, the reason I mention this is if we talk about recovery in the real world, then when people first enter recovery, it can be really distressing to find that you actually start to feel worse for a while than you do feel instantly better. It can be, if you come in for detox or a depression or anxiety and you're really a catatonic, or your addictions have left you in really bad shape, then that initial period where you start to either get some pharmacological support or you go into detox and you stop really hurting yourself, there will be that honeymoon period where you feel, wow, I'm starting to get some sleep, I'm starting to eat, I do feel better that way. But then what seems to happen is this vulnerability and these untreated primary symptoms rise to the surface, and we'll see the secondary symptoms and relational problems. When that happens, lots of people give up on recovery because it's too stressful. And so the idea of talking about recovery in the real world is, well, how do I treat this? How do I treat it? And I think one of the first things is to know that I really do need to get a handle on those two recoveries and have a sense of the impact of my history, and to have a really good sense of what's the impact regarding secondary symptoms. Because if I just get sober from alcoholism and don't deal with all those other issues and the sort of resulting relational problems, I'm going to be in trouble. So this model talks about the treatment through recovery, intimacy, and reparenting, and how it can create that functional adult. And that's what I'll move into talking about now. I did mention before that operating in the extremes. And so what's some of the examples of what that looks like around our reality? Now, breaking our reality up into those four themes of body, thinking, feelings, and behavior, then with our body, we'll show our extremes in the way we dress. For an example, our clothes might be either too revealing or oversized, or we might go the other way and hide our body, or wear clothes that are inappropriate to weather or functionality, because we're trying to use them as a way of either acting better than, or they're a mirror of the less than we feel. In regards to thinking, in early recovery from these developmental issues, we'll tend to have black and white thinking. There's no grey. We're very judgmental or too easygoing. Things are either right or wrong, good or bad. I certainly was listening to PMLD on tape this week talking about trying to remove those four words from your vocabulary and just look at functioning and dysfunctioning, because judging them in that way is less than helpful and usually interrupts that relational process. We're usually against things or for things, ideas or people and solutions, and the things we do are generally and can be generally extreme. For example, if a friend disagrees with us, the friendship can just be over. We've got no way to repair it. Regarding feelings, we can have difficulty recognizing or acknowledging or expressing feelings moderately, What was really interesting this week, I was talking to somebody, and they said it was a real revelation to them to find out that an emotion has a physical felt sense at different parts in the body, and that when you're really disconnected from your own body due to trauma, it can be quite a shock when you get sober from whatever addictions you've been using to medicate your feelings to start to feel again. So it's not just the awareness that we've got a feeling, it's that felt sense that can sometimes be experienced really intensely. Or the opposite is we're quite suppressed and repressed for quite some time, but then it'll come out in the extreme. We'll have a shame attack, or we'll rage, or we'll have a panic attack. So we can either feel them too intensely in one moment and then be completely numb in the next. In regards to our behaviour, we'll simply see a lack of moderation in behaviours. So we can sometimes trust no one or everyone. Will be extremely disciplined or have no discipline. Can be either overly affectionate or avoid touch. In essence, we just simply live in the extreme, one versus the other. So to get into recovery, there's always been three words in the functional adult column of the developmental immaturity model. It says, in regards to dependency, it starts off with we need to become aware of and appropriately meet our needs and wants. And so when it comes to our reality, I need to become aware. If I'm going to stop now medicating, overly over-medicating and disconnecting from my reality, then what's tuning into it mean? So starting to literally tune into my body and its senses and the sensations. I know in Alcoholics Anonymous they talked about the halts, or the halt it started off with, and now can be referred to as the halts. Don't get too hungry, angry, lonely, tired, or serious or sad in the extreme. Tuning in and trying to recognize those needs. So we're really getting in touch with what we think, our beliefs, our values, our attitudes, and bringing awareness to that. So we're not just acting unconsciously, sometimes from core beliefs that we simply don't believe anymore, but we haven't addressed them. That tuning into that reality of the meaning that we attach to that incoming data and communication with others. Reality about our feelings, so really knowing and getting in touch with and being able to recognize and identify feelings, and then reality in regards to our behavior. This little image sums that up. I think our art department drew this because people were sick of my bad whiteboard drawings, and so I try and wheel this out wherever I can. But when Pia Melody certainly talked about, well, what makes up your reality, she just broke it down into these four areas. And as a way of knowing, well, what do you mean by tuning into my reality? Well, this little model just tells us if I can tune into an event outside of me, what did I see? What did I hear? What did I feel? What happened? And what did I experience? And I take that in through my five senses, my felt sense, and into that embodied brain. I'll run it through my history, learning, and experiences. I'll assign a meaning, and it's that meaning that triggers that emotional reality. So it's tuning in, and then choosing, well, what's the appropriate behaviour here to meet my needs and wants. In red, you'll notice that sort of CBT approach to getting a sense of our reality really works if we haven't got complex PTSD symptoms, because different parts of our brain activate, and that activates our fight, flight, freeze mechanism. Now, tonight's webinar is certainly not talking at depth around that, but whenever I talk about that sort of CBT model of noting your reality, I think it's essential that if you've got developmental trauma, you've noticed PTSD, it was important to me to find out there's times that my survival instincts kick in and bypass my executive thinking, my frontal cortex, and go straight to that either limbic system or that the lower vagal nerve that puts me into freeze. And I've found that to be an essential part, and probably the most exciting part in the last 5 to 10 years of the work that we do about developmental trauma. As I said, the polyvagal theory, Peter Levine, Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, all going to the body, really tuning in, and therapy not being talk therapy generated anymore. That will be really working on the body, in the body, and from the body in regards to trauma release exercises, acupuncture, theatre healing, trauma-focused yoga, mindfulness, all about creating a stronger and better connection to that reality. So in brief, as we go through this, it's just tuning into those thoughts and learning experiences and beliefs, noticing then that felt sense of the uh, old and core beliefs got triggered as a reaction to what I would have got from my developmental trauma, and then connecting those to those feelings. And we've explained here many times around, we simply use those 8 primary emotions um, that keep it in its simplest form. The reason being that if you've come from a dysfunctional family, generally just using emotional words sometimes wasn't okay. It wasn't okay to be angry. It wasn't okay to be sad. Or it wasn't safe to be afraid. And healthy shame might have been experienced as toxic shame or being shamed. So it's just tuning in and starting to practice noticing that feeling in your body and learning to share that with other people. So in identifying those that under the in identifying the impact of the developmental trauma, then we want to understand, well, what is the core issues and what's that role of reparenting? So the functional adult is a part of ourselves in recovery that is able to experience relationships with ourselves first and then with others in a healthy range of behaviours. Now, to do that, I really need to be able to identify when I'm triggered into my history, when I'm triggered into the wounded child that can reflect how I felt during developmental trauma, and I'll notice it in unhealthy or codependent behaviours and emotions and attitudes. Where usually it's that felt sense of about 1 to 7 uh, in our age set, or the opposite of that, where I go to that adult adapted child that reflected the way I was parented when I experienced the developmental trauma, and I'll notice that in unhealthy codependent range of behaviours, emotions, and attitudes. So I'm operating in those 2 extremes. So the functional adult's trying to bring our awareness to that when we go into those 2 states of extremes and start to manage it and wrestle it back into the middle. So the solution to the dilemma is to create this functional adult. Now, in the model we state, and P and Melody sort of created this through treatment, recovery, intimacy, and reparenting, it supports the development of this functional adult. So what's that mean? Well, it's about taking stock and taking responsibility for ourselves. One of the things I've been aware of in recovery, and it sounds sad, but no one's coming. It's got to be generated from me now. I might have loving family or friends or even an employer or someone that's really wanting to support me to get well, but no one can do it for me. It's a journey that we take on our own, supported by others. And so part of that journey is that I take responsibility to learn how to self-esteem, that I set healthy boundaries for myself and start to practice and identify those, that I start to tune into knowing my reality and from that data appropriately meeting my needs and wants through practicing moderation. So if we look at the idea of reparenting, if you're one of those folks that from the early slides there we talked about, well, I might need more than just a sponsor and a 12-step fellowship, that I do have that toxic shame or chronic pain, that there's that suppression and repression, that I have disassociation or large chunks of memory loss, then the reparenting is about me being in charge of that reparenting myself, but getting support around me is essential. I really don't know how people do it on their own. I've not been able to achieve that myself. I found that having the support of others in early recovery was essential, because in early recovery, the thing we're most aware of is the 2 extremes in our reality. We're constantly coming from the wound or from the adaptation, and creating, even in recovery, all of those secondary symptoms and relational problems, even though we're sober. In actual fact, it can be worse. I had the opportunity this week to speak to the members of the family program on their last day, and go in and tell them a bit about the story of South Pacific and the family program, its origins, and how the Woods family brought it back from the States. And I was able to make that point because it was important in my family. Before I went to treatment, I was pretending not to use drugs. I never spoke about narcotics. I never spoke about the things that I was up to, I pretended it wasn't happening. When I left treatment and I was back in my family system, I was a member of Narcotics Anonymous, and I was praying to a higher power, and I was working 12 steps, and every night I was going off to meetings. And all of a sudden my family was thinking, wow, this guy's crazy. But I was having a bad time before, but now it's like I've gone mad. And so in early recovery, it's getting some support from outside of you, around, firstly around your 12-step recovery. You've got to deal with the thing that's killing you. So if you know, get yourself into a 12-step meeting, get a sponsor. I put that phrase down there, family of choice, meaning that the family of origin and early recovery it's nice to mend some bridges there, but if you honestly share everything with them in early recovery, you can just frighten them and cause them harm. For example, if you have a craving to use, and sharing with your husband or wife that you've got this craving can just cause a lot of pain and fear for them. But ringing your sponsor or ringing a peer in the 12-step fellowship saying, well, I got triggered today, I saw so-and-so at the railway station and they offered me drugs or whatever, I can now feel I'm dry at the back of the throat and I can't get it out of my head. They're going to really talk you through it and encourage you to do what they've done to get through it. Things like that usually involve a 12-step meeting, or it involves journaling or praying or working one of the steps. So it's getting that happening, and then getting in the community. I mean, of the 12-step fellowship. Too often I hear people say, well, I'm going to meetings, but I'll say, well, do you share when asked? Have you joined the group yet? Have you bought the book? And all those things are essential if you really want to get well. Otherwise, I always feel like if you go to 12-step meetings and you don't do those things, it's the equivalent of joining a gym and sitting in the cafeteria and looking in at everyone else doing the exercises. You'll learn about it, you'll know about it, but you're not actually doing it. And there's a saying in Narcotics Anonymous that says the therapeutic value of one addict helping another is without parallel. That we just know, when we're talking to someone that's done that journey, it's pretty hard to kid a kidder. Is the G-rated version of that old saying that you'll hear in 12-step meetings. And in early recovery, because we've got such distorted thinking about our recovery program, we can feel that we can slip very easily and very quickly into overconfidence and go back and test ourselves, and before you know it, we're in real jeopardy in our recovery. Creating support for those two recoveries would also be, if you've got that developmental trauma that's identified the esteem, boundary, reality, dependency, and moderation issues, and the resulting secondary symptoms and intimacy issues that go with that, then that's where your therapist and one-on-one or group therapy to continue to do that work and to learn how to regulate those emotions, especially if complex post-traumatic stress has been created as a result of that developmental trauma. It's essential to get that support, get other people around that understand and can support you. But ultimately, it's your responsibility. And as I mentioned earlier, it's something that we have to do for ourselves. So what's relational accountability and recovery look like? If I'm going to get into recovery and start to get connection with other people again, then in regards to my intimate relationships or peer relationships, then these principles will start to make themselves known. I need to start requesting intimacy, and now for people with abandonment issues in their childhood, that over neediness needs to be managed with some containment. And for folks that were enmeshed in their childhood, that have avoidance issues in their adult lives around relationships, they sometimes need to practice sort of coming out more and requesting more to get needs met. So working that out for yourself as part of that developmental ongoing sort of therapy will be important. But here's some of the things that we can do. Requesting intimacy, physical intimacy, physical touch. I know sometimes at SPP our A-frame hugs can be ridiculed and people joke. And I even said I met someone here for relapse tonight and said, how about an A-frame hug? And we laughed and we hugged each other. And I think that's still probably a reaction to the fact that physical intimacy was difficult for me when I was young. But I'm glad that we support appropriate physical touch because we need it as human beings. Sexual intimacy, and that becomes part of recovery, requesting it for the people that are anorectic, and people containing it if it's an addiction or moderation issue for you, but generally learning and knowing how to do it. Intellectual intimacy, sharing thoughts with internal boundaries, and hearing the reality of others and sharing our reality and learning how to connect. And that emotional intimacy, again, with internal boundaries, containing and sharing, or protecting and hearing, and getting a sense of yourself and others. And then if we can be physically intimate, sexually, emotionally, and intellectually intimate, we're going to be really experiencing ourselves, and then practice some spiritual intimacy. Firstly, through knowing us, really knowing others, and then being open to know a power greater than ourselves. So ideally, we're requesting support when needed instead of going into needless and wantlessness, that we start to replace that manipulation to get our needs met with straight talk, and using our sharing of reality format here is a great way to practice straight talk in early recovery. Showing up to relationships and being present, and I think it's an ever increasing difficulty just for modern society, people disconnecting um, from each other. So it's really showing up and being present, and not being on your phone and not being distracted, and turning up and connecting with others. Or when you're in a meeting, putting the phone on silent and turning it off and being present. Paying attention, and so it's one thing to be present, but then I've always loved Peter Melody's relational suggestions is we need to give them time, attention, and direction. So I've got to be present, I've got to turn up and give them time, but when I'm there, I've got to pay attention and really listen with curiosity and interest. Who am I? But with a good filter of an internal boundary, who are they? Owning my reality, starting to tell the truth and being rigorously honest. We're not to injure ourselves or others, but the owning our reality is meaning I need to do some journaling, I need to check in what it is, I need to tell the truth about that and practice that honesty, which really puts me in my functional adult and not in the symptoms of the dishonesty that we saw as a relational issue for our reality issues. Asking for what we need and want is a really important way to start to take responsibility for those needs and wants. I know in my recent trip to the Meadows, they talk about a vulnerable request after they share a listening or like a talking boundary with somebody. But the next sentence is very important. I'm responsible for that need or want being met. I can ask for the need or want to be met, but I'm responsible for it. So I really need to let go of the attachment to the outcome and learn to celebrate a no when I get it. That if someone says no, they can't meet that need, that they're looking after themselves, which is what I'm learning to do for myself. And that's a great practice of an internal boundary, because that can be a real challenge in early recovery. You finally build up enough courage to get your needs met. I see it here at SBP all the time, where someone finally gets the courage to write out a reality, and they go to share it to someone and they say, look, I can't hear it right now. And one of the things I really do respect is it's very important to come out and share my reality, but it's just as important. And to be honest, if I am not able to hear you right now because I fear I won't be able to either protect my own reality or contain myself, then letting you know that's really important. So if anyone tells you the no, even if if you're anticipating that they're being manipulative, it's still worth celebrating the no, because they're letting you know, look, right now I'm just going to be immature if we go on with this. And that means, look, get some support from somewhere else. Ring a sponsor, ring a peer, talk it through. Doesn't mean we need to go back and shut down. From there, we can learn to experience gratitude, noticing what I get or have instead of what I don't get or don't have. That's starting to focus on the cup half full and not half empty. So if we then look at, well, how would I know if I'm being successful in this reparenting? How would I know that through my treatment and recovery and through my intimacy that I'm getting these skills? Now, in Pia Melody's resource, um, mapping your recovery, she makes this point really clearly, saying that in our secondary symptoms, it's a lot easier to see with our alcoholism or eating disorder that we've got some results around our recovery. In our impact from our trauma, we can still quantify it and look at it. One of the ways is we will start to experience our value from within, and our opinion of ourselves is balanced, and we've got inherent worth. So when I have a disagreement or a fear or something triggers me from outside, my stock in myself doesn't go down. We start to experience personal boundaries and start to set them. so I can contain myself when I need to, and I can protect myself when I need to. I become aware of my reality, my body, my thoughts, my feelings, and I feel quite centered in my experience of me. And from that awareness and centeredness, I can actually move to meet my needs and wants in a moderate fashion. So more and more I'm living in the moment with the skills I'm developing in recovery. And so these skills do grow, but they're very difficult in early recovery because our most dominant personality traits are those the wound or the adult adapted child. So it's balancing those, learning and really focusing on building the skills, and yet acknowledging at times I'm going to get derailed. What will happen and why it gets a little bit tough in early recovery is that once we come out of the fog and haze of our untreated mental health issues, we get some relief from our physical illnesses, we start to connect with others and hear others, and our addictions go on to abstinence, we get into a program, then we start to notice what happened. And once I've got here written, once we learn that what children need to thrive, and we work out how and why that was interrupted for us, we'll be faced with the grieving process, because we're going to come out of that denial and delusion and minimization and start to feel and grieve what we didn't get, and the unfelt shame and pain that goes with that, and we'll also have to grieve what we did get in some cases when we start to identify, wow, that was a physical abuse, or that was a sexual abuse, and where we might have had a distorted thinking about that. I watched a gentleman recently have to come to terms with a sexual event in his puberty that he thought was sort of life-giving and empowering. And then we really came out of the delusion of that, the crushing reality of that. He was traumatized. He was an abused person, and he'd built a whole fantasy of that for 20 odd years before that. He needed to grieve that loss, and then finally started rebuilding himself from there. So this is why the first year of recovery we can actually feel more pain than when we were ignorant. Ignorance is a sharp sort of word when I wrote that, but that saying that ignorance is bliss and the examined life is no picnic. So in recovery, I think what's important is that we can heal from this. This is quite possible. And we'll do that by coming out of, I suppose, the denials and the different stages I'll look at in a second. One of the ways, and I've always loved the work of Carolyn Niss when she talks about the need for forgiveness. Once I start to grieve, and I grieve what I did get and what I didn't get, then I need to start to also deal with the feelings of when I've then gone on and created injury in other people's lives. So I need to look at the people that I've affected, and working the steps helps us do that. We can go on to make amends. Our family program here at SPP can do that. Looking at the effect on myself by abandoning, when I've lived in those two extremes, I've then injured myself in my recovery by acting out and abandoning myself, so needing to forgive ourselves for what we've created, and then accepting our secondary symptoms and the unmanageability we've created in our own lives, and from there start the recovery program for both the secondary symptoms and the recovery from our history. So in recovery, once you've got that abstinence, and once you've got some knowledge of that functional adult, and you're working on those underlying issues, be careful of the stress that can come up in early recovery. Just living life on life's terms for anyone that's got that developmental immaturity, over time the stress builds, and it can happen really quickly the earlier you are to recovery. Then be careful of the things that can come up where that'll avoid and disconnect you from your feelings. So alcohol, drugs, food, work, sexual behavior. Now, if they're not a bottom line behavior for you, you might still be able to drink alcohol, but you'll notice that you're feeling more stressed and you're relying on it to change how you feel. So just with those things, be mindful and tune in. If they're bottom line behaviors, then they're something to be completely avoided. Look at how we might use people, nicotine, computers, or the internet, exercise, TV, gambling, spending, shopping, that money addictions, turning to religion or fantasy, mobile phones, and fill in the blank, others, gaming, different ways that we might, just tune out from how we feel. And then over time, when we do that, we're on that road to relapse. So what are you looking for when you then are going, well, what are the stages of recovery from my history? So if we've experienced this trauma in our early life, and we can have that impact on our nervous system I spoke about before, that polyvagal theory, that dysregulation that happens, well then it'll be needing in recovery to work on those regulation skills. That's a subject for another day. Our new PTSD program that we've got running here, both open and closed now, are addressing those regulation skills. But in regards to coming out of denial, the 5 stages here are important to travel through. I've got to get through that "it didn't happen to me" stage of denial, the victim stage of, well, it did happen to me, but it's everyone else's fault. It can be, that victim anger, and we stay in that resentment. Moving through the stage of accountability, okay, this is what happened to me and this is how I feel about it, so we're sort of in it. We move through there that, I did hear Pam Melody say once that on a tape that she said that, that by the time she got in and started looking at that, she got to a point where she was sort of sick of being in recovery but couldn't go back because she knew too much. So we will have that feeling of, wow, we're in this now, and we need to keep pushing through it. And then eventually that integration stage of, well, look, I have a different acceptance, a deeper acceptance of me now, of where I've come from and what I've experienced. And from that deeper acceptance, I can then have a curiosity and a compassion towards others, and actually, get an altruistic sort of experience in life where I get to carry that message to others as well. So recovery from a history is absolutely possible. It's just tough in those early stages. Now, the same goes for your disease, whether it be mental health, physical, or addiction issues, that, well, we can be in complete denial. It's everyone else, what addiction, what are you talking about? We can finally get some evidence where, well, look, it's all your fault if you didn't nag me, or you didn't do this or didn't do that, or if I wasn't this or that. That stage of accountability, I need to admit and acknowledge, look, who I am and what I do. So it's finally, our first step is probably the first step of the 12-step program, and one of the tools we use here, where we really look at how have I tried to be powerful over this, and how's my life become unmanageable, and as a result of that, trying to be powerful over something I'm powerless over. So we finally start to admit it. That survivor stage of, I am starting to develop the functional adult skills that will allow me to experience life as an appropriate adult. And part of that appropriateness is accepting the realities of, if you've got a disease of any form of addiction, well, it might be an abstinence program now, and there's some grieving that happens around that and some acceptance that happens around that. And that leads to that integration stage of, I have a deeper way of experiencing gratitude and life that I wouldn't have happened if I hadn't gone through what I did to get here. Now, sometimes you'll even be in a 12-step meeting and you'll hear someone say this crazy sentence, and they'll have a little bit of time up and they'll go, look, I'm sort of grateful that I'm an addict, because if I wasn't an addict, I probably never would have found a power greater than me, or a 12-step fellowship, or a life like they're living right now. And so if you hear that crazy statement, this is sort of what they're talking about. They've got to that deeper gratitude that they've learned lessons from what's happened to them. One of the tools I think is a really important tool and helpful tool is Dr. Patrick Cahn's. I think I blogged on him the other day saying I vote for him to get a Nobel Peace Prize for the millions of lives that his work has supported and helped. He works running the Gentle Path program now, the Meadows in Arizona, over there with Pam Melody and Claudia Black, and those guys are still a heart and inspiration of work that we do here. And one of the tools Patrick came up with for recovering people was to not just be abstinent. He said, look, he had a personal craziness index, and you can look this up online. So by all means, look online and grab hold of it. And it looks in the areas of physical health. And now transportation is interesting, because codependents that live in the extreme, the state of their car, even putting petrol in their car, the mess of it, the maintenance of it, you'll start to see the two extremes in action. Your environment at home and your life there, your work life, so interests that you have and hobbies, social life, connection to family and significant others, finances for people in recovery that live in the extremes, spiritual life and personal reflection, how to factor that in, and other addictions and symptom behaviour, meaning that in some of the research they've done through the Gentle Path is that 87% of people with one addiction have two or more. So you see that a lot in recovery. People get clean and sober from, say, alcohol, but they're still gambling or they're still sexually acting out. And so this personal craziness index helps us to drill into these areas, and it'd be great to do a webinar just on this tool because it's so intensive. As you look at these certain areas of your recovery, so you can start to see when you're slipping. And the tool itself in action is you write out areas of growth that you want to commit to in these areas, in those 10 subjects. And then you start to give yourself literally a number when you start slipping. And how many of those did you do today? And it's in moderation, so it's not creating a bar you can't get over. And then you start to really graph it and know, look, I'm sliding here and I've got to be careful. So doing something active in your recovery that's holistic, that helps us not live in those two extremes, giving our functional adult these tools can be really significant when it comes to that recovery process. So in summary, what are some of the tips like in regards to this recovery in the real world? I think I carried on that Patrick Kahn's themes, his 30 tasks of recovery list. One of the guiding principles of our day programs and ongoing recovery programs here now is we want to be able to provide our alumni experiences for up to that first 5 years where they can come back and get top-ups and do groups that really build on these two recoveries, our Mastering Moods program, our PTSD program, our Life Skills 1 program, and our relapse prevention programs really address those secondary symptom recoveries I talked about tonight. The complex PTSD closed group starts to really drill down into the regulation skills we need if we've got that PTSD, which is a new group that started here that starts to deal with those primary history recovery issues. And our Life Skills 2 program, based on the Breaking Free resource of Peter Melody, is another one that really deals with our history. So we've been able to get those programs now that if you come to South Pacific, it's not just that 21 days inpatient that sets the trajectory, it's everything you do after that that's really important. You've got nothing to lose in those early days, 90 meetings in 90 days, and certainly you'll be at meetings and you'll hear people that have had maybe not a relapse, but they've started to see their personal craziness get too much, and they recommit to those 90 meetings because they nearly relapse. So going to meetings regularly to really start to get those new neuro pathways happening it can be really important. But as I said, don't go there as a spectator. Go there as someone who gets involved. You know, get right into the meetings and be active. Using a diary and starting a recovery journal. We're pretty excited here. As every inpatient comes in, we're pretty well ready to sign off in our inpatient journal that tracks your internal recovery process here. That'll be another new improvement for us, which is Chris Mordew and myself are looking at the clinical content of that the other day. So writing, what Dr. Dan Siegel's saying, the neurobiologists are telling us now is that narrative, that writing and really tuning into our reality is another way to integrate and regulate the damage to the brain, the right and left hemisphere. Identifying people, places and things that are necessary for you to avoid an early recovery. And in South Pacific, we have the recovery wheel as part of the aftercare package, where you start to look at what's in the center, what are my bottom line behaviors, what are the things I'm really committing to not doing, and then what are the slippery people, places and things that I need to avoid because they are simply a trigger. What we're powerless over in early recovery is not picking up. You can listen to my voice right now and leave this webinar and never use again. If you're hearing this as a resource after the fact and got it as an MP3 off our website, you can get off this webinar and never use again. We're not powerless over the decision not to use, but we're certainly powerless over the meaning that our neuropathways give due to repetition to people, places and things that trigger that craving to use. And then that sort of parasympathetic nervous system that fires up, that can either be triggered accidentally Or one of the things I see often is people getting too overconfident in early recovery and too cocky, and they're putting themselves in those slippery places with slippery people, and keeping sort of paraphernalia and things that they think they can manage, and before you know it, they're on that slippery slide to a relapse. As I said, join a 12-step group. Don't just attend meetings. Join a group. When they open it up for a group constant, join it. Take on a service position as soon as you can and feel ready. That can be as simple as stacking chairs, washing cups, etc. Making a daily decision. The daily decision that we talk about in recovery can be committing to that recovery process. I still remember 29 years ago in the facility I went to, standing in front of the mirror every day saying, "My name's Steve. I'm an addict, and just for today I'm willing not to pick up a drink or a drug." It's funny how the beginning of that new neural pathway has never left me. As I said, identifying bottom lines and practicing that honesty, openness, and willingness to how recovery, sharing honestly with others. But then once we share it honestly, you don't want to be a commentator to your own disaster. It's being open then for some direction, being open with once we get that direction to be willing to put it into practice. Getting phone numbers, looking at not just when you attend meeting. If someone says something at a 12-step meeting that you really relate to, approach them and ask for their number. That is the culture. And I imagine that some of you listening to this know that. I remember the first phone call I ever made in recovery, and it really saved me that evening, and I never forgot it. It was the hardest thing ever to ask for numbers, though. I felt like I was asking someone out on a date. It was an awful experience, but I just put it in that category. This is what they're telling me to do. I've got to do what people are telling me will save my life. And it's the I suppose these are the things. If someone joins a 12-step fellowship or someone's part of our day program here, then those is like Relapse Tonight. Right here in the room next to me tonight is our 2 relapse prevention groups humming along. It's amazing we haven't heard any yelling or shouting in there. They can get rowdy. It's But they're in there. But that group goes for 3.5 hours, or 4 hours in total, once a week. So if you're really relying and hoping that's going to hold you, it's not. And that's what I tell people about a 12-step meeting. In a 24-hour period, what a 12-step meeting is people who work a program for those other, and I always get this wrong due to dyslexia, those other 21 or 22 and a half hours. It's where they go to share what they do for the rest of their day, where they work a program other than just being in that meeting. And so yeah, as you make that daily decision, identify those bottom lines, share them with people, and get on with the process of recovery. Download MP3s, recovery books, these sorts of webinars, YouTube videos, and listen to them over and over. I used to love. Back in the day, you'd have to get your cassettes off someone at the 12-step meetings, and now we can just get on and download whole conventions. So please, those dark nights of the soul that can happen in recovery, that recovery in the real world theme where we're really struggling, really not sure what's going on. It's 3 a.m. in the morning, then you can't sleep. You make a cup of tea, you put the earplugs in, and you listen to someone sharing at a convention from online on YouTube, and all of a sudden you're at peace again. And these are the things that people that stay well do. There's no one gets an easy run in recovery. No one gets time up in recovery because they're lucky. It's hard work for everybody. None of us get out of here alive. So the real world aspect of this tonight for me is if you hit some patches in your recovery that feel really tough, don't do it alone. I don't know how people do it alone. I just feel for people when they come in here and they're too afraid to ask for that help. Your life depends on you asking for that help. Ask for that help with the need that a burning man needs to run into a lake. It really is when you walk towards either SPP and our programs, the 12-step programs we support people to go to when they leave. It's the culture to be reaching out for support, and not just from your peers. It's wonderful to have peers, but peers are just as vulnerable as you. As soon as you can, you get a sponsor, you get a good therapist, and you get phone numbers of people that have got more recovery than you. They're the people you can ring, and they're less likely to be having, that using thought or that defeatist thought. I do also, though, believe that on any given day, the reason 12-step fellowships work is because we're all not having a bad day at the same time. I'm constantly humbled in long-term recovery from my need of healthy relationships with other recovering people and professional people to keep me growing and learning. And I've really come to accept that that's part of long-term recovery. So, in other words, we walk down a different street. Like that poem says, we finally walk down a different line. So don't stop 5 minutes before the miracle happens. There's a saying in recovery that you're not responsible for your disease. You're not responsible now for what got you here or your history in regards to your developmental trauma, but you are responsible for your recovery. And it's in taking responsibility, it can really open you up to a life better than you've ever known. So I will finish with the Peter Melody's statement that recovery is like trudging the road to your happy destiny. I was reading a post today by Lee McCormack. He's a spiritualist and a country singer and a therapist, and works at the ranch in Nashville, Tennessee, in recovery. And he really speaks powerfully about how important it is to link to the positive things in recovery, to not be defined by your trauma, to not get stuck in that old story. And I think recovery is really two themes. We need to be where we are today and work on what we need to today. But it's really important to go to meetings and hear the stories of the people that have made it through that stage that you're in. And there will be some trudging in early recovery. For you folks that have got developmental trauma and PTSD, there's going to be some hard times learning those new skills to regulate how you feel. It's going to feel impossible at times. For you folks that are in early recovery from addiction issues, your brain is going to be suffering with the symptoms of acute withdrawal syndrome and post-acute withdrawal syndrome. And that's a lecture for another day, but that alone means that up to the first 18 months in recovery, literally your neurochemistry is still rebalancing, and you can be doing everything right that you need to do and still feel quite dreadful. But it will pass. And that happy destiny it can be available to you right now if you can just reach out, because even that recovery is a great example of a problem shares a problem halved, and an addict alone is in bad company. And I think that goes for a codependent alone is in bad company, someone with developmental trauma, because if I'm here listening to my own head when I'm in a regressed state, I'm in bad company. So if I can at least get myself to a 12-step meeting, to a therapy group, to one of the day programs, honestly share what's going on, then that'll be the trudging, but the end result will be the happy destiny, that I'm going to get that recovery. And I'm constantly moved by testimony here every week. It doesn't matter how many times I hear it, it's just what it's like when I see the light switch on for people and they finally, they sort of come back home. And I think one of the things I'll probably finish tonight with about this recovery in the real world is when I start to get back in touch with me, and I start to remove the things that disconnect me from me, and I start to practice those things mindfully and spiritually, and I practice those skills of really being in connection with others, I'm going to connect to myself in a way deeper than I've ever known. And I'm sort of waiting excitedly for the book that I know Peter Melody is currently writing, which talks about the idea that the functional adult is the seat of the soul. It's that connection, literally, to a power greater than you. And as we say here, that power is defined by you. We don't have an opinion on that. This is a spiritual program, not a religious program. But I think people in recovery that do the trudging, when they finally get to experience the spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, there's moments in recovery that are inexplicably amazing. And they're hard to even imagine when you're that person sitting in detox or sitting in that psychiatrist's office and wondering, how the hell is this ever going to work? So I hope tonight this has been interesting. I hope it's gone over some stuff that maybe that you knew and it was a good revision. I hope it's mentioned maybe some things. Generally, we would ask for any questions. So if you're listening now and want to type a question, You guys can't see her, but she's right here beside me, Samantha Higgins. If she wasn't here, I'd be talking to a blank screen. I probably wouldn't even turn the computer on. So I want to thank her and our relations manager, Jackie Grant, who organises and make sure these webinars are out there. But if there's any questions, you can certainly just send a little message through to me now or email us here. We usually get questions from our webinar series where people email us and they get passed on to me, and we will get back to you. So it looks like at the moment we're not getting too many questions come through. So what I might do is sign off. I want to thank you all for tuning in tonight. If you're tuning in to our website and hearing this webinar, remember that we ask you here to expect a miracle because we know that you are a miracle. So bye for now.